Thank you for joining me today. My name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans, and I have been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for 24 years. I came to this practice during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and panic disorder. And my panic disorder had become severe enough that I was fully agoraphobic. I was housebound. I was on disability, unable to go past the front door without having a meltdown of panic. And I was fortunate enough to be paired up with a psychologist who even back then was several decades deep into practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation. And he offered me these tips and techniques as a way of dealing with what I was going through at the time. And I was not thrilled with his suggestion. I was unable to work. I was unable to go past the front door. Here's a guy saying, let's sit and watch the breathing for a while, see what happens. Okay, great. Thanks. He didn't give me anything else, and I was sitting at home panicking all day anyway, and I figured, all right, I'm going to give this an honest shot just long enough I can tell him, look, dude, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now? And like I say, this was 24 years ago. I never did have that conversation with him. I'm still practicing every day. Now I'm teaching. There seems to be something to this. And that's what brings me here. And I'm happy to have you here with me. This is part of my ongoing series that I call Calm. Calming Anxiety by Living Mindfully. And in this series, I offer some of the techniques that I was using back in those early days of my practice, that I still use today in my practice, as a way of dealing with one of these quirks of the human condition, this anxiety. It's not necessarily our fault that we experience anxiety, but it's up to us what we do with it, how we manage it, how we make it so that even if it may cause us some discomfort, some pain perhaps, we want to work with it in such a way that we are not adding suffering on top of that discomfort. Anxiety is a manageable state. And that's what we're doing here, is learning how to see it more clearly so we can manage it more skillfully, so it doesn't dictate our lives in a way that it once did for me. Let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to be offering one of my favorite techniques today. Okay? I like to begin my sitting by imagining that I am suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string that is attached to the top of my head, as a nice cue to sit up straight, without adding any extra tension to do so. If you're feeling any tension right now, that's fine. It's absolutely fine. I've never found it useful to try to get rid of tension, per se, because that involves force, which is really just a form of bringing more tension to the tension in an attempt to get rid of tension. Shockingly, that's never worked for me. So if there's some tension here, I invite you to just let it be tension. Let it be here. Let it leave in its own time, which may or may not be today. I also like to notice what is in contact with the floor, the chair, cushion. So there's a sense of grounding beneath me. Something is supporting me. I can allow it to do so. Let's take a moment to notice that grounding at the bottom. This gentle lift at the top. And whatever else happens to be here for us right now, however it is. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. Very often when we bring our attention to our breathing, we begin to shape it or control it, usually in a way that we think we need to for our meditation practice. Like the breathing needs to be a certain way. And there may be some practices where it is supposed to be a certain way, but this is not one of them. Our meditative breath is simply the breath that we have while we are meditating. Let's take a minute or two and notice the breathing that we have here today, as it is. Whether it's long or short, deep or shallow. What kind of breath do we happen to have right now, in this moment? Now, in this practice, mindfulness, insight meditation, vipassana, we're making space for things to arise, to process, to pass. This is one of the reasons we work with the breathing. It arises, it processes, it passes, it does it all again. Whether we're controlling it or not. And we're working on building a skill, building a habit. Of seeing how, really, everything is a process that arises, processes, passes. Physical sensations, feelings, but the tricky one for most of us is thinking. We're making space for things to arise, and things arise. Very often those things are thoughts. And our thoughts can carry us away. We start to identify with the storylines, our role in the daydreams, these movies that we're both writing and playing for ourselves. We're the writer, the director, the audience, actor, everything, right? And we're not here to necessarily stop that. We have minds. They think. But like with anxiety, we can learn how to manage thinking. And learning how to manage thinking, in turn, helps us manage our anxiety. Because where is our anxiety coming from? Our thinking. So if we're going to observe our thought processes as they arise and pass and fall, without getting caught up in so many of them, we need some strategies, some tools, some techniques to do this. And today I'll offer one that I have found very effective for myself, and perhaps some of you will find it effective as well. This is one I call the movie screen technique. Very often when I'm experiencing anxiety, what initially sparks it off is some kind of frozen mental image. Something I don't want to deal with. Maybe it's something coming up in the near future. Maybe it's just some vague sense of something. But for me, it starts out as this mental picture. And maybe I stay stuck on that mental picture. Or maybe I start to weave a storyline around it and it starts to become a movie. Either way, what I find helpful is to imagine I am watching a movie screen. I come to the breathing, present moment, and I look at this movie screen that's blank. And I know at some point, probably pretty soon, something's going to pop up on that movie screen. Some thought, some image. But because I was already paying attention to that movie screen, I'm ready for it. I say, up, and catch it right away. There it is. There's an image. And come back to the breathing. Because I'm not spinning up a storyline about it and just came right back to the breathing, the image, sooner or later, will pass on its own, sometimes very quickly. And we just watch the screen again. And that's our only job. Is to watch the screen, anchor on the breathing, catch what comes up, come back to the breathing. Watch the blank screen. Let's work with that for a couple of minutes. You may find a bunch of things coming up on your screen very quickly. You may find the same thing coming up on your screen over and over again. You may find there's very little activity on your screen. It's not about the content of what is coming up on the screen. It's about the process of catching it, letting it be. Sometimes as things start to settle, when using this technique, it starts to feel like the breathing process is wiping the screen clean for me. Like a windshield wiper. Going one way on the inhale, back again on the exhale. Just clearing away whatever residue might be left from the most recent mental image. And starting again. A clean slate. As you go through your day today, or your evening, your night, you may take a moment here and there and notice what's coming up on your movie screen. And what happens if you just see that it's there? And perhaps allow the next in-breath and out-breath to wipe the screen clean. Not forcing anything away. Simply allowing what has come up to process. And leave in its own time. As we continue to engage in this practice, we lose that identification we all form with those images, those storylines. All the thinking, all the selfing we build around them. That begins to ease. And probably not coincidentally, I've found a lot of my anxiety to ease along with it. As I was saying at the beginning, this is how we manage this human quirk of anxiety, that maybe it's not our fault that we have it, but it is on us how we work with it. And when we manage our anxiety, when we manage the discomfort that can come with it in a skillful way, we don't add extra suffering on top. And this is how we live more skillfully. And walk the path with greater ease. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to hang on for a few minutes in case anyone would like to share or ask anything in the chat. Hey, Chris, non-resistance. Yeah, I talk about non-resistance an awful lot. I have a session out on Insight Timer here and also my YouTube channel called Unlocking Acceptance. And non-resistance, spoiler alert, is a huge part of that. Movie scenes or movie screen from a show. Movie screen, but whatever works for you. Yeah, I think of it as a movie screen. So if I'm already watching it, then I'm ready when something pops up on it. And I'm less likely to get carried away by it. I've found this technique extraordinarily helpful, particularly for those times when I have some kind of recurring thinking coming up. And that mental image, just that frozen mental image comes up again and again and again. And there's this tendency every time it comes up to immediately start running away with some storyline. And having a technique to catch that at the mental image, that initial frozen mental image stage, is just huge. If we can catch it at that stage, even if we're just catching the damn thing again and again and again and again and again, even just that, aside from not going into the storylines about it, just seeing that process happening again and again, and recognizing that we don't have a choice what's coming up. We have a choice about running away with it after it's come up. But here we're exercising a different choice. We don't have a choice about it coming up, but we're finding a different way to work with it. And not only does that take away a lot of its momentum, it also helps to ease that identification with it. Because we really identify with those storylines we spin about them because, well, we're the ones spinning the storylines. But if we just see the mental image coming up again and again and again, and we see, well, look, I'm not doing that. That's just coming up. That's something the subconscious is showing to me. And honestly, why is the subconscious showing it to me? Well, probably because every time it does, I pick it up and run away with it. So if we stop doing that and we start to see, oh, well, this isn't really me, and I can just see that it comes up again and again and again, not really do anything with it, just let it pass. Even if it just keeps arising, just let it keep passing. Eventually, a subconscious might start to figure out, oh, this doesn't have that same effect it used to. I don't toss this out there and get a whole bunch of attention and, maybe I won't throw it out there quite so often, right? But even if it does, even if it does keep throwing it out there just as often, at least we're still not doing the whole run away with it thing, which is suffering. This is what the Buddha taught. How are we using our minds? Are we using them in a way that increases or decreases our suffering? You know, what's coming up, but also what are we doing with what's coming up? So I've found this movie screen technique to be extraordinarily effective for myself when it comes to not just catching what's coming up, but working with it skillfully, the what am I doing with it part. Very powerful technique for not adding suffering to our pain or discomfort, I found. Ren, kept catching myself thinking that I'm thinking. Yeah. That's some of that clear seeing that we're developing here, is noticing thinking for what it is. I keep talking about this identification. We often fall into this trap of thinking that we are our thoughts, which we're not. If we were our thoughts, then who's the one listening to them? Who are we when we're thinking something else? Who are we when we're asleep and maybe not thinking? If we're our thoughts, then all the stuff that's coming up in our mind, well, I guess we are doing that. But are we? It's kind of like when we're sitting and watching the breathing. Do we have a choice when we lose the breathing and spin off into a storyline, or does it just happen? Do we have a choice when we realize we have dropped off into a storyline and come back to the breathing, or does it just happen? So are we our thoughts? I don't know. It doesn't seem that way to me. So yeah, noticing that we're thinking, that thinking is happening. But that's not us. We start to gain a little bit of space, a little bit of breathing room, which again helps us to differentiate not just what's coming up, but what are we doing with what's coming up? In this case, thinking. And our observation of the fact that thinking is happening. Right? Oh, this is a good one. Okay, from Ren. This is, my thoughts seem to have the speed of light, another after another, before I manage to even focus on the breathing. I wonder if that's the reason why I often get caught in panic. Yeah, that resonates with me. In my panic disorder, agoraphobia days, racing thoughts was a huge one, was a huge catalyst for panic attacks. And in my case, it was thoughts of how do I stop these racing thoughts, and perhaps accelerated breathing and a panic attack. It's all very circular, a real vicious cycle. Panic about panic. Racing thoughts about racing thoughts. Right? That's also not surprising, by the way, that's the way it happens. Because really a panic attack is a fight or flight response gone haywire, really. We still have, evolutionarily, this hardwired sense to go into fight or flight mode when we think there's an emergency. And in a really twisted, ironic sort of way, if we, and this is certainly the way I was, if we feel like a panic attack is an emergency, we start to have fight or flight response about having a panic attack. And we end up in the exact cycle that left me housebound. And really, what was that cycle but thinking? And thinking about thinking. Because there was no actual emergency. I was perfectly safe. But I was so freaked out about the experience of panic that I gave myself more panic. And when I gave myself more panic, I tried harder not to have panic. And coming to the breathing, using something like a movie screen technique, can help us reverse that cycle. Start to recognize that thoughts, sensations, feelings, they're all processes. They're all processes. They all arise. They all change in some way. They all pass. But in order to allow them to pass, they have to go through the processing phase. And if we're fighting with them, if we're interfering with them, if we're arguing with them, if we're trying to stamp them out, they don't have a chance to process. They don't leave. We need to be able to make some space, make some room for discomfort. In my experience, the comfort zone is always either expanding or shrinking. It doesn't stay static like any other process. The comfort zone's a process. So we need to work with our comfort zone, manage our comfort zone skillfully, so that it's expanding. In a healthy way, of course. We don't try to go too quickly. But we brush up against the walls of our comfort zone, push a little bit. And the wider it gets, the more of those things that were just outside the comfort zone start to fall within the comfort zone. Oh, that thing? Okay, I did that. I can do that again. I got that. And then we push out a little further. That's all I've been doing for almost a quarter of a century. Just been doing it every day. And my whole life is completely different. But there's nothing special about me. It's just daily practice. Chris, you step out of the cycle by watching it. That's exactly it. We are observing the process of what is happening rather than getting caught up in the content of it. The content that, by the way, once again, we are creating. We're the writer, we're the director, we're the actor, we're the audience, making this whole big show for ourselves. How's it working out for us, though? But one of the characteristics of the human mind that we can exploit here is the fact that we cannot multitask. We can't do two things at the same time. We can go back and forth between tasks very, very quickly. So it seems like we're multitasking, but we can't actually multitask. So what does this mean? This means that we cannot observe the writing of the storylines and be writing the storylines at the same time. We can't observe the process and be caught up in the content at the same time. So in any moment that we are observing the process, looking behind the curtain, in that precise moment, we are alleviating our suffering, necessarily, because we're not engaging in the process of creating it. From Michelle here, could the too many thoughts be the reason I couldn't get a picture, that it was just a flickering on my movie screen? I could absolutely see that. There have been times when I have become very still in my practice and have seen just how fast there's activity happening within me, whether it's physical sensation, thoughts, mental images. When we become really, really still and quiet and expansive, there are these moments where we suddenly start to see all the activity that's happening. And it can be overwhelming. It's like, holy crap, is this all happening all the time? And I would imagine at a subconscious level that it is. I mean, we've got how many millions or billions of neurons firing in every second, so it must be, right? This is why the brain has to filter out so much stuff before it, hands it to our conscious awareness, because we couldn't possibly handle it all. But when we're making space and settling and allowing that stuff to come through as much as we can, we get little glimpses of it here and there. And it's, it's wild. It's really amazing to see and experience. I've only had it happen a few times at a really deep level. But you see it and you're like, oh, holy crap, okay. So there's an awful lot going on back there. So it behooves us to handle that tiny subset that is coming to us consciously in a skillful way. So yeah, I resonate with what you're asking there. Yeah. I think I'll wrap it up there. I hope to see you all again real soon. Cheers, everyone. Take care.